Welcome to the podcast where we challenge conventional thinking and explore fresh, forward-looking perspectives on leadership. Whether you're a seasoned executive or an aspiring leader, join us on a journey to uncover the complexities of modern leadership. Because leadership itself may not change, but the way we think about it is constantly evolving. This is Rethinking Leadership, a podcast by C.O.U.R.A.G.E Business School, hosted by Executive Professor Roemer Visser.
Today's guest is Christopher Williams. Christopher is a TED speaker, a TED Talk held in May of 2025, 7 Choices for a Courageous Life, and author of a book by almost the same title. The title is C.O.U.R.A.G.E, 7 Choices for Living a Life Without Regret, published in November of 2025. Yes. Christopher, welcome to this episode.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Is it fair to say that you are essentially a recovering corporate?
It's very fair. I spent 25 years in various corporate positions. Mm-hmm. I started my career in investment banking, and then after that moved into the retail and sports and lifestyle fashion space, and spent a few decades, I would say, with a number of different big multinational companies.
Yeah.
And in 2018, I decided to step out of that world and do other things with my life, and I've not gone back. So yes, I am a recovering corporate executive.
Well, welcome to the club.
Thank you.
And for the listener, I think your back. So you gave us a bit of a sneak preview, but your backstory is not just fascinating, at least to me, but also really relevant to this conversation that we're going to have today. So tell us a little bit more about the bigger arc of your story, because it seems to be, from the outside looking in, a little bit of a rags to riches story. And at the very least, your story is different than most, I would say. So tell us, for the listener, by introduction, a little bit more about your story, please.
Yes, it's different. I wouldn't call it rags to riches as much, but it is quite interesting, even when I think about it myself. I was born in Sierra Leone in the early 70s, mm-hmm. At a time when the country had newly found independence, and unfortunately started to spiral into economic decline. So I spent most of my formative years in a country that was part optimistic, but also in a state of slight despair as things started to change. I eventually left when I was about 18, 19, and went to the US to study at Morehouse College. And after studying economics, I ended up, like most people who come to the US and get degrees there, working for American companies, and hence spent 25 years in a number of different companies, working, my way to a very senior position at my last role. So I'm quite excited about that journey because it shapes a lot of my perspective. It definitely shapes a lot of what I write about in the book. And it spans Sierra Leone, which was and is today poor relatively to most countries in the world, and definitely to the United States, but ends up living in the US and now in Europe, at the other end of the economic spectrum. And then there's everything else in between, with traveling for work and living in different countries, 14 cities altogether around the world. So a lot of stops along the way, highly nomadic and very international, but also very grounded in those early beginnings in Sierra Leone, and influenced by everything else that has happened since then.
Yeah, and very, very successful by most conventional standards.
Yes.
And still, the decision to step away from that in 2018.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what it's in many ways the starting point of the book, but the actual story, like I said, goes back a lot further. And essentially back in 2018, doing quite well, I had, as we sometimes say, a come to Jesus moment when I realized that I was quite successful, but still feeling unfulfilled. And there were a number of reasons that led to that sense of unfulfillment. And I unpack some of them in the book. But the short story is that I decided to step out of the corporate world and begin to work on things that I was very passionate about. I wanted to feel like I was exercising agency in how I was applying all my talents and strengths, accumulated over the years to things that truly made a difference in the world, and gave me a sense of satisfaction that I was actually, making good on all the investments that had been made by me and others in my career for many, many decades. And the answer was not working in the corporate world in the way that I used to. I still consult with companies. I still do a lot of governance work and sit on boards today, but with a very different sense of mission than I did when I worked actively.
Great. Thank you. And I'm curious, tell us, because I imagine that decision to step out of the world that had become so, I guess, familiar to you. I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's what I would imagine. Not only familiar, also a lot of promise, right? You write in the book, you were pretty much on the way to the C-suites, right? You were right below that sort of that top rung. I imagine you didn't make the decision to walk away from that lightly, right? Because you know what you're giving up. You don't know what you're going to get in return. So tell us a little bit about how that decision unfolded for you.
Yes, I think the starting point is growing up, as I said, in a place like Sierra Leone, where your outlook is marked by, at least for mine, was marked by two things. One was the idea that I could self-actualize outside of Sierra Leone because my parents were educated. They inspired us to do our best. And I realized that some of those opportunities would be constrained living there. And so, unfortunately, I was part of the brain drain of the 80s and the 90s when I left. So, but you were fueled by this desire to achieve.
Yeah.
And that was one. And then the other one was that,
I'm just curious. So there was clearly your own desire to achieve, but I can imagine with that you would also carry the expectations
exactly
of your parents,
yes.
siblings,
yes,
Sierra Leoneans generally.
Yeah,
is that fair to say?
That's absolutely. And you just took the words out of my mouth. It's a push and the pull, and the push to some degrees, living up to others' expectations, and they weren't ill-intentioned. Obviously, every parent wants the best for their kids, and in Sierra Leone at the time, and maybe still today, there's this appeal and this desire to actualize, academically and intellectually and professionally, because so much of what life is about your ability to live a good physical existence. And so it comes very quickly to what can you achieve and what can you afford, because that's what makes things happen in terms of your family life, your personal life, and your extended family life. So that becomes part of the equation.
Yep.
And so with that momentum, I came to the US and did quite well. So as you described earlier, by the time I was more senior, you are, and I was at the time, realizing a lot of the initial goals that had fueled my early years, working for a large company, having an interesting international life, traveling around the world and doing all the fun things. And so you can rightly say you've arrived or you are successful and you've achieved. And even more so, like you mentioned, there was still momentum to do more. And you had been trained to explore and continue to grow and achieve and achieve and achieve. Yeah. And so that was still sort of the mindset. Yeah. So leaving that was not just leaving a job, 7 years ago. It was essentially forsaking, in many ways, a long-term trajectory, a long-term aspiration. And so it was very momentous in that way. Because it had this big implication for, this is what you've been working for so many years.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I was, obviously, I wouldn't say that, but I have 2 young children, was married, and they're quite young. So you also think about the longevity of your own professional career to provide for them in a world that obviously is becoming more and more unaffordable in many ways. So all of those things played into the conversation and the decision and made it quite an important one.
Yeah.
But it was ultimately one that I allowed to be influenced not just by those factors, but by the ones that I talked about earlier. The idea of, what was my legacy going to be? How could I really make good on my own talents? How could I really impact the world? If I were to disappear one day, what would people say about me? And what would I have left behind? And in what ways would I have enabled others who might not have had my own good fortunes to at least make some headway in their own journeys? Understanding that mine, while it was still happening, had been quite good, had been quite successful.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a big sort of reflection on what giving back really meant and to what end I was working and to what end my life would be and to what degree I had to make a very intentional decision, to impact, more things than just my own career.
So you were just mentioning that you've got this, I guess the weight of this entire trajectory. You're not just giving up a lifestyle, you're giving up so much more.
A long-term aspiration.
A long-term aspiration, which kind of calls into question, why have I been doing this in the first place?
Right.
So I imagine that doesn't come obviously lightly at all. Was this mostly an internal conversation with you doing some disciplined reflecting? Did you have support from people around you who helped guide you through that process? And second question, about how long did that take, that process of getting clear on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, first and foremost, it was a factor of the moment. And the reason I say so is because 2018, which is when I last left when I last worked in a corporate role, had been a difficult year following a very good year in 2017. And difficult in the sense that there were new challenges in 2018. I was in a very specific position that required a lot of change management, and now I'm getting into the work conversations. And I think enough for me to begin to question if I was approaching, or if others I was working with were approaching the work that we were all doing in the same way as I was. And I felt that it was less about us doing good for the organization and more impacted by personal agendas and ego. And I think for me, I felt a little bit disconnected with a conversation with a team that had all these different motivations. Yeah. So I think that's made me reflect on where do I want, in what environments do I want to be working? Yeah. And more specifically, what should I be working on? And should I not be working in environments and with people who were vested and who were trying to make a real change? So it started as that, and then it built into a bigger question about purpose and is this the right thing to be doing, and is this the right context to be doing it in? And that was part of the conversation externally. And internally, a lot of it was me going through this thought process. But my wife was also involved because she understands me, like we all have spouses and loved ones who understand us more than anyone else. And she could see and understand what my passions were, what my strengths were, what I was working on and getting out of it, and realizing that there was this disconnect. So you get a lot of support from someone who wants you to find more congruence in all the things that you're doing and working. And that's a big reassurance. Ultimately, that's the sacrifice you make. Yeah. But it's nice when you have the support of the loved ones around you as you make that next move. Yeah. So that was very helpful as well.
Okay. Was there a particular moment that you remembered? Okay, I'm thinking about there's this long buildup, and then there's this moment of the decision sort of falls.
Yes.
What was that? Was there any particular trigger that said, okay, now I know?
Yeah, it was in the middle of all of this. Someone on the team that I was working on at the time had a major health emergency. And for me, that was the very strong, jarring moment of, wow, life is very fleeting. And we work hard at it, and we are in the moment, and sometimes we are consumed with ourselves. But there's so much more else going on. It's not just the environment around us, it's the people around us who rely on us. And what is the goal of, and what is the purpose of doing the work that we do in the way that we do it, very intensively, completely consumed by it, if it's not to build something bigger than us. Because at any point, things could happen. We could get pulled away from it, sometimes permanently in case of mortality. And I think for me, that was the moment when I felt that I could not take for granted this long runway that I knew I had professionally. I couldn't take for granted it was going to be there. I couldn't live for that. I had to live for the moment. And I had to leverage my knowledge of the past and my experience from the past to make the present moment meaningful, and not be as consumed with imagining what could happen in the future when there was so much to be grateful for and so much to leverage right now. So we're just putting these time horizons in context and in terms of what they meant for a decision, that forced me to, number one, be aware, and then number two, make a call that, okay, here's how you're going to go with your life going forward.
So here's a question. It's probably an unfair question. I doubt you'll really be able to answer it, but I have a suspicion that there are many people in positions of great success by those same standards who are in their vulnerable moments, they succumb to thoughts like this as well. Doubts, like, what is this for? What's the bigger picture here? Yet, perhaps, they keep kicking the can down the road. What was it that set you apart from them and got you to really face those questions?
It's an interesting one. I have to answer this with no judgment.
Of course.
Obviously, everyone has a different life path, life trajectory. And so my approach with these conversations, and even as I was writing the book, it was a no judgment zone.
Yeah.
It was telling my story and explaining how I got to the inflection points that I arrived at and the choices that I made once I got there. So I wanted to caveat, that up front. It's interesting you asked the question, because what I realized was that the decision to move on, gets challenged by some practical realities. Can I afford it? Mm-hmm. And if so, who gets impacted if I do it? And when I really engage that as one of the most important, I think, questions most people ask, okay, can I afford if I walk away from this? I realized a few things. Number one, I'm not rich in that sense. So with all this conversation, that should not be the assumption anyone makes here. But I realized that I was comfortable. And I also realized that I was talented enough to make a living in other ways. So I think sometimes we build out this, at least in the past, I might have built out this specter of being completely lost and being at risk if I wasn't working for a large company or in a interesting, important sounding role. When really, the question was, are you talented? I think I am. Do you have value to add to the world? I believe so. Mm-hmm. And are you interested and curious about exploring different ways to live your life? And I was. Yeah. So for me, that very significantly lowered, this specter of the risk.
Yeah.
But I think it also illuminated something else. Because what I realized was that when you're successful, or we become successful, many of us tend to, lead and live into the success. And we build around us a very complicated set of relationships that are based on the success itself. And sometimes those relationships and that structure within which we live is way unfit for purpose. It's not what we need to survive. It's what we've told ourselves we need. It's what we've decided we need to be surrounded by. Things that we own that we really don't need. A lifestyle we live that is maybe way more extravagant than it needs to be. And so all of these structures lock you in and make some of these choices really hard. And one of the things that I suggest when I speak to people is, throughout your life, be in a constant conversation with yourself about what it is that you need and what it is that you want and what it is that you have, and make sure that there's some balance. And because I think once we get locked into that construct, it forecloses lots of flexibility in the future.
It's really
and it's something I think young people, as they are going in their careers, especially my kids, I want them to know that. I used to work for a manager who used to say, don't invest, before the curve, invest after the curve, and I think sometimes, I get a letter that I've been promoted and right away I got and buy a new car, why? I mean, the car you had before you got the letter was working quite fine. But I think there's a lot of those kinds of decisions which I had found myself making, and I think others make as well. Yeah. And again, I'm not being judgmental here, which makes this risk and this mortgages your flexibility. Yeah.
This is fascinating. Of course, I think it's fascinating. I shouldn't say that because it is fascinating. But see, the reason many people say that they want to earn a really good living is fundamentally comes down to freedom.
Yes.
And what you're saying, the sort of the pitfall that you fell into and many others also fall into is that it's paradoxically, we create a prison.
Yes.
By committing to something maybe bigger than maybe what we should. Yes. And we create it, so we move in the direction of the opposite of freedom. Yes. Which is what you describe as being locked in. So there's a call to action here of, be free. And one of my previous guests, excuse me, one of my previous guests in the Dutch-speaking first season of this podcast, he says, as a leader, you don't want to be, and the Dutch word is chantabel, you don't want to be vulnerable to blackmail or manipulation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the second you don't have, and he actually said you want to have a certain amount of, I can't say this here, but FU money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. You want to have some resources buffers so that you can actually hold your back straight and say no, instead of swaying under the pressure of manipulation, social pressures. Mm-hmm. And so that's one part, of course. Don't get in that situation where you can no longer move, where you have to.
Yes.
I'm wondering, so on the one hand, it's almost like you've got this scale. Here are the voices for. I'm more talented than maybe I give myself credit for. I'm perfectly capable of creating something new. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And here's, I don't know if I can afford it, and who's gonna sort of pay the price, if you will, of reduced income and more uncertainty. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if on this other side, the side keeping you in place, is something along the lines of what would they think? Mm-hmm. How was that for you? Yeah,
it's because it's funny because we build our careers and when you have a long career, like all of us do, a lot of your professional relationships have only come to know you in the context of that career.
Yeah.
So they've only come to know you as, person X in this company, ever so often, maybe moves to another company with a bigger job and a more interesting title, and is successful. Mm-hmm. And that's all they know you to be. And they don't know you any other way. And maybe in some cases you can argue that had you not been in that environment, you might never have met some of these people.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're leaving, you run the risk of leaving all that behind.
Yeah.
And the lifestyle and the comfort that came with all of that. And so yes, there's a big societal element here. There are professional clubs, there are social groups that all revolve around work and career.
Yeah.
And when you when you remove yourself from them, you get pretty good feedback about, well, you're leaving us. Well, I'm not leaving you. I'm just changing what I'm doing. I'm still here, but something changes.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's when you begin to have a good sense of, because you're also making decisions about what your new tribe is going forward.
Yeah.
And so that helps you begin to understand, okay, who's going to be in my new tribe? Because you're kind of walking away from the old tribe.
Exactly. You're switching tribes.
Yeah. Like who understands, who supports, who's going to be helpful, who's going to be going to inspire you versus continuously make you feel like you've made a terrible decision. Yeah. And sometimes you have to make those calls, and I've had to.
You've had to?
Yeah, not in any negative context, but I've had to de-emphasize some relationships that don't understand what I'm doing, don't understand the new mindset. Yeah. And that's totally fine. Sometimes you have to make some of those choices as well, because you have to be systemically true to yourself. Yeah. You can't make the decision in isolation. Other things have to give. And sometimes the people you hang out with have to change. And maybe others that you might not have spent some time with, you get to appreciate in a whole different way. And so it's a big adjustment. Yeah. And it's not one you make lightly and you take lightly, because it's moving things around a little. Sometimes more than a little.
Yeah, it's more than rearranging the furniture.
Yeah. So that all comes into play as well.
So then would it be fair to say that what sets you apart from this hypothetical, let's say, twin of yours somewhere who's not facing the questions, that what sets you apart is the courage to look that in the eye?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's what it takes. So courage is the ability to act in spite of fear, in spite of the risks you face. And so it takes courage to make all of these calls. Some of them require more courage than others. It depends again on the quantum of risk and your own relationship with fear. Yeah. But it takes courage, because you are resetting things. And that's part of what I talk about very early in my writing. We are in this state of autopilot, which is it's working, it's comfortable, it's not broken, nothing to fix.
And frankly, typically we're surrounded by people who are also, to some extent, on autopilot.
Yeah, and again, that's why this is interesting, because we've all sort of gone through the same kinds of institutions, and we all have the same aspirations, and we've all come to believe that this is the path that most people will take or should take. And I think part of the exploration of courage is really trying to understand what are the different paths. Yeah. And there's no one, and there are multiple. And I think it's happening at an interesting time where technology is becoming a major factor in our lives, and maybe in some ways, making us aware of other paths that we might not have been aware of before, and enabling them in different ways. So I think that's also part of the conversation here. Sure. And I think for me, I'm lucky that I was alive at a time where technology has, at least the way we understand it today, has become more ubiquitous and so much more malleable to different end users. And I can work independently and do marketing and have virtual assistants and build an infrastructure around myself, which would have been impossible 20 years ago, and makes the cost of me moving on and doing something else a lot lower.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. I appreciated what you said a couple of minutes ago about the you noticed the conversations in that last year you were in your corporate role changing. Yes. In a difficult year. And if I heard you correctly, you said something like, are these the conversations that really matter? Mm-hmm. Something like that. And it really echoes, frankly, an opinion of mine, which is, a lot of the leadership conversations we have in the organizational context are some version of the question, how do I get more out of my people? Mm-hmm. Subtext, unspoken. Yeah. Because I want to make my bonus.
Yeah.
There's a transactionality that slips into this conversation. And it's unspoken simply probably because A, it's uncomfortable, and B, it's assumed we're all on the same page here. We are here to make money.
Yes.
And if you make money, I make money, and so we all want the same thing, let's do it. And if that then becomes the context that's a fairly limited scope of leadership.
Yes.
I would argue.
Yes.
It becomes instrumental, transactional, and you get questions like, how do I handle this situation? What do I say? What do I do?
Yes.
And there's a lot of people making really good money off of that, off of that industry,
Absolutely.
right? What you're doing, and for the reader, obviously courage is a 7-letter word, and you've made courage an acronym where each letter in that word stands for a question you need to sort of answer for yourself, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Tell us a little bit about the first letter, the C.
Yeah. The C is commit to your purpose. And there are a couple of caveats here. We talk a lot about purpose as, in many ways, as some really weighty decision, a profound statement, which we get to with a lot of thought and introspection and maybe a process, that's quite intensive. And that could all be true. But I speak about it, a little bit more abstractly, in the sense that courage needs something to work for. Every decision where you're faced with a choice, especially one that has options that are fraught with risk or which leave you feeling fearful in advance of making the choice, those are weighty calls to make. And it's, in my experience, I found it to be a lot easier or helped by having something that was important that the decision was going to impact. So that's how I get to the point of saying, really having something that strongly motivates you, strongly drives you, that is important to you or important to people around you, that you have a personal, intense commitment to, is really important to frame your ability to be courageous. It's hard to be courageous about anything if you don't care much about anything.
There you go.
There's nothing to fight for. There's nothing to work for.
That's why I want to brought up that transactionality thing.
Exactly.
To what purpose?
Exactly.
And you may have a corporate mission statement somewhere.
Yes.
But adopting a collective purpose or mission statement does not mean that people are committed.
Yes, exactly. And that's why this is a very personal thing. As a corporate executive, and you hit the nail on the head, we tend to focus on how to drive results for the company and what our role will be in driving those results. And our role is also shaped by how will we be rewarded, how would we be promoted, and how would we be paid and bonused. And many times it stops there. And the company might have very laudable, aspirational ideas about how it's going to change the world. And yes, we kind of believe in them, but most times, at least in the rooms that I was in, it came down to, here's what we are. If closing the quarter, we have to make a call.
Thank you.
And we're trying to manage earnings.
Yeah.
And here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of executives spend their time just managing that task and managing the crisis connected with that task, and do that really well.
And maybe to add to that, if that's the driving value, then any act that might sort of be risky and would require courage, courage would then work for that.
Yes.
For bigger market share, for more shareholder value.
Yes.
But not necessarily for the underlying mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and it raises a lot of interesting questions because, number one, if the company has high aspirations about itself, and in many cases, these aspirations are about more than the company itself. It's about impacting stakeholders.
Yeah.
It's about impacting the community at large. If you really are attendant to those aspirations, we would make many different choices than the ones we actually make.
Thank you.
So I think we prioritize the business results from the broader stakeholder impact. And I think very early I started to see this, and I could play the game, but I was increasingly uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
And then it just cascades down.
Yeah.
And that's how you train, and that's how a leader is selected, and then the cycle perpetuates itself. And so after a while, you see this drift of a company and its culture from its ideals.
Yeah.
But when you I had this unique, and we talked about my background earlier, I had this unique, meander around the world, from more humble beginnings to where I was, and lots of stops along the way in environments that had influenced me with at least a pretty decent dose of social awareness. And I think at a young age, I didn't know what to do with any of that. It was more my personal outlook to life. Mm-hmm. But as I got older and I saw the leverage factor of large companies and what they could do with their brands, what they could do with their voice, what they could do with the reach of their impact in terms of the global community, they begin to realize that, wow, there's real power here. And you also realize another thing, that you can actually leverage and use that power in ways that are quite positive and still do well.
Yeah.
But you also realize that most of the time we're focused on the doing well part and not on the having a positive impact part of the equation.
Yeah.
And so I think you get to a point where, as the leader, depending on how you're oriented, you either are fine with it or you're not. And I was increasingly uncomfortable with that, especially since I knew that it was a question of choice. It's not impossible. There are lots of examples of amazing companies, respected companies, profitable companies that have a very positive, social imprint or footprint on the world.
Exactly.
And so it's doable. And so, but then it takes courage for someone to want to have those unpopular conversations with their peers, or to have those conversations in the boardroom or with shareholders, or with others who have not spent the time understanding that this is quite doable, and feeling like it's some zero-sum game. And when most times, for the most part, many of us just go with the flow.
Yeah.
And I think that's where courage in executive boardrooms and courage in large companies becomes a really important attribute for success.
Well, and like you said, it needs something to work for.
It does.
And that's such a wonderful statement. What is your courage working for?
Yes.
What is something your courage is willing to go to work for?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And for me, so I had to then, all of what this challenged me to do is to find that harmony within myself. And in that process, I had to then go back and work on what do I believe?
Yeah.
And that's where the conversation that led to the book started.
Yeah.
Was, okay, what do you have to show for close to 50 years of life? Like, what have you seen? What have you heard? If you were to boil it down to, here's what I've learned, what is it? And then how do you make that the platform or the foundation for your work going forward? And what I had learned was that I care. I care about opportunities for all. I believe that we are all beneficiaries of our own circumstance. I was born into a middle-class family. My parents are educated, and that's great. We were able to, turn those elements, those attributes into something that brought me to where I am today. I'm sure someone else was born on that exact same day as I was, maybe a few miles from where I was born, into very different circumstances. Not their choice, not any more than the family that I was born into was my choice. So it's kind of interesting how we sort of assume that what we are is what we've earned and it's ours.
Yeah.
And we protect it fiercely, and we compare ourselves with others. And if we don't feel like they match up to us, it's because they've not done something. They've not worked as hard, or they've not applied themselves as we have. And we have this sense of entitlement. And I think I realized in this process that I needed to challenge that a lot more than I had in the past. And going forward, I wanted to make that difference.
Wow.
And so my work since then has been very focused on human resource development.
Yeah.
And I use that, it sounds like a corporate term, but essentially people.
Yep.
I like to engage people and help them in their journey wherever they are.
Yeah.
And a big part of the message is really empowering them with their own sense of agency.
Yeah.
And demystifying people like me who look like we were born smart and special, because that's not the case. But if you didn't know me, and you might say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, he's fine. I mean, he's a different thing. But I try to demystify that. Not just my own experience, but the experience of others, because I've been in lots of rooms with a lot of amazing leaders, people who we read about in the papers. And I can also very honestly say to people, I've spent time with them. Trust me, there's nothing that they can do that you can do. And really just demystify this notion that, leadership and success is some birthright that some people have and some people don't. And if you don't have it, well, too bad. And you settle in some way, So that's kind of what I spend a lot of my time talking about.
So that's clear that's driving your sort of feeding your courage.
Yes, absolutely.
In maybe also in going public with your book, with your TED Talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, nice. And maybe I can share 2 examples from some research that I did with a co-author of mine, Evert Pruis. We had. And we haven't published this in any peer-reviewed setting yet. That might still come at some point. But they were in-depth interviews with leaders in the broad sense of the word, people who have accomplished something special, who are in some ways on top of the game, wide variety of people. But 2 examples that come to mind, triggered by your book. Excuse me. One of them is a sort of a management board member doing work on kind of an interim base. He would be called in. He had this reputation. They called him the WD-40 of management teams.
Yeah.
They would bring him in, and he would get things going again. He would, I guess, lubricate the process. And he had something kind of special that allowed him to do that. And that's what we kind of unpacked in that interview. And he had a guiding principle, what we called a guiding principle, but it could also be that larger commitment. And it was the 3 Musketeers. All for one, one for all.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very, and he was this really humble, nice guy. So his default would have been, I'm not going to have the uncomfortable conversation with people. I'm definitely not going to fire people because I want to be one of the guys. But that commitment to all for one, one for all was so strong that if anybody in that team violated that rule, he said, we can have fights, whatever. Internally, we can say everything, but outside, we do not air our dirty laundry. We do not reveal anything about anyone. If you violate that rule, you're out. And so that the commitment to that principle was so strong that he had no choice but to follow through. And actually his fears or his concerns about doing so, about having that negative, uncomfortable conversation shrank to a minimum, and he just did it. And so there's a really clear example of a higher commitment that fed a decision. Yeah. There's another woman, she's an innovation manager for one of the big cities in the Netherlands, massive budget. She was trying to get something done to improve the city. Her supervisor blocked it. And without batting an eye, she went 2 levels over his head, pitched the idea, got it approved, and then from the top down, her supervisor was pressured into giving her approval. Obviously, in some settings, that could be a career-limiting move, right? That could be a career suicide. And we asked her about it, and she never gave it a second thought.
Yes.
Because her commitment was, I want to leave a better city behind for my children. And by extension, all children. So anyway, I just wanted to, I guess, sort of validate what you're saying. That's what we found as well. And it also takes leadership out of the transactional.
Absolutely.
And a little bit more sort of purpose-driven. So what is it that gets you up in the morning? What is your, what do you care about? What's your passion? People often say, what's your passion? Or follow your passion. Almost to the point where it's a cliche. There's a great word in Dutch. It's called hartstocht. And it translates into passion, but literally it means the tug of the heart.
Yes.
And we don't know if the heart's doing the tugging or if the heart's being tugged. But that's what was driving them, and that's what became sort of the overall frame for their daily decision making, which then led to some extraordinary decisions. So I just wanted to, I guess, validate. Yeah. I think this is a hugely undervalued conversation.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the question you raised, which started all of this, which is, why is that the first chapter, or why is that the first of the 7 choices? Yeah, it's this one about what drives you.
Yeah.
Because it simplifies things in dramatic ways and helpful ways.
Yes.
And at the same time, it fuels you in the ways that you need to be fueled.
Yeah.
To go against the inertia, or overcome the obstacles or the barriers in your way.
So for the listener who's thinking, I get that. I get what you're saying, but I don't know what my passion is. I don't know why I'm here on this planet.
Oh, jeez, that's...
Where to start?
Oh, man, it's an interesting one. That's why I said at the start that, when you start to use words like, your mission, people get a little... they get a little stressed out. Like, what does that mean?
It's really big.
I mean, and there's all sorts of words there. The mission, there's a North Star, what's your purpose? I mean, we can quibble about the definitions, but I think they're all kind of trying to point you in the same direction. And for me, I'm trying not to have a message that makes people more stressed when they are done speaking with me. Mm-hmm. So I try to simplify things. In many cases, I might even oversimplify things, and that's totally fine in my view. There's this Japanese concept. I mean, at least we claim it's Japanese, but I think it's evolved, through different cultural lenses of ikigai.
Ikigai, yes.
And for those who are not familiar with it, it's this 4 circles that overlap in the middle. Mm-hmm. One is what's your passion, what's your strength, what will impact the world or change the world, and then what would the world pay for, or something to that degree. Yeah. And then where they intersect, well, that's kind of you. That's where you need to be focused. And I found people, I know people who found that very useful, and I think it is. Yeah. And go through the process of, making those 4 lists and seeing where there's alignment across all of them. I think that's, if there's a framework that one can use, I think that's fine. I'm more organic with this than anything else. I have explored just interacting with the world, because that's what I think I'm supposed to do as a human being, interact with the world. And I'm very aware of the environments that I'm in. And I ask myself questions. Why is this environment this way? And why is that other environment that way? Why am I having this conversation with one person and a very different conversation with another person? Why is it that I have this set of priorities when I'm in one context, and I'm in a different set of priorities when I'm in another context? Yeah. And I ask myself why. I mean, maybe if anything, my go-to place is why. And I see what moves me, because inside of that conversation, inside of that inquiry, is discovering, some dissonance with something in society, or in how a system works, or in how a model and ultimately connects with its professed purpose, and maybe it's not connecting as well as it should. And then I ask myself, do I care? And to the degree that I care, I let myself be led by my own sense of empathy. Mm-hmm. And in that I found the things that I'm excited about. And that's how I found, a focus on education, because I understand what it meant in my life. I understand how it changed my trajectory. I understand how that happened in terms of how did I gain access, how was it paid for, and while I was in the process, how was I supported, and how after that did my outcomes magnify and amplify. And I know exactly what that experience was. And I want others to experience it. So I'm very interested in, do you have access to education? How do you pay for it? How do you weather the challenge of being educated? And when you're done, how do you amplify that into outcomes? But that's because that was my experience. And I felt like it was a difference maker in my life. And I would imagine it's a difference maker in someone else's life. So that's kind of how I came to my own what work that I do.
Okay.
So what I'm passionate about is really helping people navigate their own growth.
Yeah.
Maybe through formal education, but sometimes through informal education.
Yeah.
And to be there along the way, helping them demystify all the issues that would make it hard for them to be successful.
Yeah. Okay, so I think what you're saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, where it starts is having an honest conversation with yourself, really, right? About giving space to those voices, those weak signals that maybe come from the pit of your stomach or from some other place that are telling you something is not right or something is missing, and engage in. Don't start with a big, now I have to find my passion.
Yeah.
Because then probably you're going to think of something that's socially desirable and it's going to leave you just as empty.
Yeah, it might not be you. It might be
somebody else's passion. Exactly. Or somebody else's expectation coming through.
Exactly.
Go have that conversation, potentially use the Ikigai model as a way to kind of structure the conversation, but ultimately it's a process of engaging in a conversation with yourself.
Listen to yourself and listen to the world around you. And the one point I would make is it needs us being more self-aware, and it needs us being more reflective. So don't gloss over the things that happen. Yeah, that's the wrong side of the tracks. That's the good side of the tracks. Well, I'm going to keep on going. I said, well, why is that? And do I care? Does that bother me?
Yeah.
So lean into the heart, the strings as they tug at your heart and at your sense of empathy, and see what that reveals. It may reveals maybe something that you really care about, and something that you might have the ability to impact in some way. So that's what I've done. It's more organic, but it's that listening. Listen to yourself and listen to the world around you. Yeah. But then do so with self-awareness and reflection.
Maybe we can end on that note, that if you want to, but I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, that if you want to sort of increase your leadership effectiveness, if you will, increase your impact, that's actually the wrong place to start. Find what you deeply care about.
Yeah. Find
the thing that your courage is willing to work for.
Yes.
And follow that, and you will find your leadership getting better.
Absolutely. Because we have lots, I agree 100%. We have lots of other skills that will all align in service of that direction.
Yeah.
But you have to create that, and then organically let other things reveal themselves. And moreover, let other partners and collaborators reveal themselves. Because that's also an important part. We're not islands by ourselves. We're not isolated. And the more you begin to show that passion, you begin to show that interest, then, you realize, wow, there are lots of other people like me.
Yeah.
And since I've written this book, or even leading up to this book, when I started to speak more and more about courage and more about my own journey to it, more and more about my passion, sort of helping people grow personally, especially through the educational processes. All sorts of interesting, connections happen just because of that. And so you realize that, wow, there are other people out there who are on the same path or who have the same interests with whom one can collaborate. And that's been probably one of the more exciting elements of the last few years.
So that's your new tribe.
Yeah. Well, tribes more than
plural.
one. Yeah, different tribes.
Yeah.
And many of whom have become really close friends as well.
Yeah.
Because you're more in alignment in more ways than you might have been in the past with the people you spend time with.
Well, Christopher, that's a great dot on the horizon for people to look forward to when they're considering whether or not to make the plunge. There is life. There is more than life on that other side once you take the plunge.
Absolutely.
It's been an absolute pleasure having the episode. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.